Okay, we've all had our 8 or 10 minute break. The rest of you watching the archive version have had about a 30-second break. Hope you enjoyed it either way. As we move into the second part of this, let us go back to that basic theory of pointing out the things that you want your learners to remember. If they're only going to remember three big concepts, remember the first concept today was the idea of planning saves you from having empty rooms. Second thing is the overall thing that learning is transformation. Every bit as beautiful as that butterfly that we're talking about here. If we get that image in our minds that we want our learning experience to be as beautiful and as memorable as that butterfly, we're on the track, on the path to creating exactly that kind of experience for our learners and for ourselves. We remain enthusiastic and engaged too if we're doing that. So here we go. Let's get technical just for a few minutes here. One is ADDIE, the design model that we're going to be talking about here. You'll see the different elements of ADDIE at the top of each of the slides that you're about to see. It starts with analyzing, looking at the need for the training you're about to do. Then you get into your design phase where you start thinking about what it's going to look like and how you're going to do it, whether it's going to be a video, whether it's going to be live face-to-face, whether you're going to throw paper airplanes at people and each paper airplane will have part of the lesson. Just kidding on that one, but who knows, maybe it would work. Development is where you actually start writing your scripts, designing or doing your slide decks and making those ready for the day of preparation. I is for implementation. That is like what we're experiencing today. That is where we are learning together, and for better or for worse, hoping it's going to have an impact, which then leads us to the final step of ADDIE, which is evaluating for success and for failures, so that we return and it becomes a cyclical thing where, again, you are analyzing for your next session and designing and developing and implementing. So think here not in terms so much that this is something where you do step by step and only that step at any given time. What you're thinking about here is when you're in the analysis phase and you're thinking about their learning design, you want to be creating measurable things that allow you in the evaluation phase to say, did I achieve what I was trying to do? Question here is, are we working on training staff or users of our libraries? This works for either as far as I'm concerned. If you are, and if you're asking for specific assignments that where you'll be doing your presentation in session 5 or 6, I'm leaving that to you. Find the way to make what you're learning in these sessions most applicable and most valuable back in your own workplace. If doing a training for library staff is where your heart is and where your real pain point and need is right now, focus on that. If you can take some of what you got in the earlier parts of the leadership program and take that back for your staff, focus on that if it makes sense to you. But again, we're co-conspirators here. I'm not going to direct you that you must do this, you must do that. The thing that you must do, if you must do anything, is create an engaging, transformative experience for your learners. The book on the screen there, Training Library Patrons the ADDIE Way, is really nice because it speaks to us in terms of some of our audience. Is not talking about our colleagues, but even there, I think I made this point in an email to one of you earlier this week when I was looking at follow-up comments. We oftentimes make a dichotomy between our colleagues who work in the library and patrons who are the library users. Let us not forget that we sometimes are also patrons of the libraries that we work in. So some of the trainings that we design to show people how to use our equipment, we may have staff members who need that same kind of training. And so we're working at both levels. So the book is up there because it's the best book I could find that actually connects ADDIE to library settings. But there are lots of ADDIE books out there, and if that one isn't the one for you, have at it. So let's look at these elements. It starts off with that analysis phase, and I don't have to say a lot here because we've already spent so much time in the first hour of really putting eyes to the lens and looking not only at the close-up stuff, but the big picture elements that you're responding to. A question not enough of us ask is when a supervisor comes to us and says, I want you to do training on this, to accomplish that. And the question we should be asking up front is it really something that needs to be addressed through training? So if somebody comes to you and says, we need to train 850 employees in our place because we're getting a new library information system and everybody has to know how to use it. Slam dunk there. That's clear that that is a training issue. Somebody comes up to you a few minutes later and says, I've got one employee out of the 850 who is just harassing people all the time in the workplace and comes to work late, goes home early, takes 5-hour lunch hours on a 4.5-hour workday. You do the math. We need to do a training for staff on the basic rules of the handbook. And your question immediately should be, is that a training issue? Or is that an HR, human resources issue? And there we go. So Denise is saying, yeah, HR issue. That should be clear to every one of us. And that's the sort of question that we should be ready to ask. And it should be the sort of situation we take into the analysis phase. Now, many of us have had that experience where we have a supervisor who's adamant and says you have to do a training and you have no choice. So then you're going to just take the best that you can take out of that situation and try to make lemonade out of the lemons. But as much as you can, if you are in a position where your training skills are respected and you're actually part of that leadership team at the table, and I always say to people, as a trainer, you should be at that leadership table, helping to set the agenda as well as implement it. You should not be sitting in an office where somebody comes up to you once a year and says, here's all the training you're going to do next year, because it undercuts the use of your expertise. And it also does not give you the dynamic trainings program and set of workshops that you can do through proper analysis. I'm going to move on to the next one, but again, if you've got other questions or observations, feel free at any point to pop those in or just unmute yourself so that we stop and spend a little more time on this. Design is kind of a fun one. You'll notice up at the top here, I'm putting in ADDIE, the capital letter. Once we get past those first two, I realize the A and the D are both capital here, but what I'm trying to do in ADDIE is tell you where we are in the ADDIE process. And in design, I believe through painful experience that one of the mistakes we make is trying to over-design a session. We try to create a slide deck that says everything. We try to script ourselves out to the minute so that we avoid those moments of quote unquote failure that we want to avoid. If we make it too complex, A, the learners are not going to be able to retain it. B, it's going to be hard for us to remember and to follow what we're trying to do. And C, it's just going to be the kind of mess that you see here. So we need to take off kind of our chef hats that we see in that particular picture. And we have to not go for a Rube Goldberg type of solution. Let us keep our trainings clean and fun and concise, focused on the learners and focused on results. When you start to design, you ask yourself those questions of, am I going to use a video? Am I going to use a blended learning approach? Or am I going to do it all on site? Or am I going to do it online? Am I going to go for a flipped classroom model because that puts some onus for learning on the learners, but when we come together, it allows us in our learning space to use the time together to interact with each other and apply the lessons rather than listen to a lecture. Key issues to think about in terms of design. The developing phase, wouldn't it be great if we could just put our lesson plan into a vat of chemicals and out came the picture? A little more complex than that. A couple of thoughts about development, and you will experience this as we go further into this set of sessions and your own experiences. Developing is going to depend on the amount of time you have. In some situations, you know about a workshop 3 to 6 months in advance. You can do a survey of your staff, make sure that you've got the key elements there. In the best of situations, which few of us actually have in library land, but in the best of situations, you have a chance to do a test run of your proposed learning session with a few sample learners, get feedback from them, and then improve it before you roll it out to your whole staff. But development is going to depend on the kind of time and the resources you have. Do not knock your head up against the wall trying to do more than your time and resources allow. Do the best you can. Nightmare story. I may have told you this in the first session, but it's a story well worth repeating. And that's when I was working on a project with some colleagues. We had a very tight time frame. Let's talk about the situation because it makes it understandable. A decade ago, I was part of a team going into a major insurance company that had to deal with the Affordable Care Act and what that was going to mean to their staff and to their clients. A bunch of us as instructional designers and trainers were brought in to create 6 5-minute training videos that dealt with the basic issues that they needed to know in that organization to best serve their customers. So I think there were 5 or 6 of us. There was a video expert. There were a few of us who were pretty quick as writers on it. And we had a project manager. We sat down on day one and said, here's how much time we have in the project. Here's what we have to produce. So if we're going to do that, this is how we're going to have to break down the workload. And that's all the time we have for it. We will do what that time allows. Somebody threw a monkey wrench into it the second or third day when we were still trying to familiarize ourselves with the Affordable Care Act. We were all doing a lot of reading, absorbing like banshees as quickly as we could. And somebody higher up in the company said to us, oh, we want to see a basic outline of your scripts tomorrow. It's like, we thought we had a few weeks to get those scripts together. And now they're saying they want some basic scripts by tomorrow. My colleagues, because they hadn't had the experience I had in terms of saying, first relax, because if you don't relax, you're dead. So, all right, let's break that down mathematically. They really want this by midday tomorrow. That means we should have some basic scripts done by the end of the day for all 5 or 6 of these videos, however many it was at the time. So that means we basically have an hour per script, and that's what we're going to do. And that's going to be the rough draft. And I said, and we've got to build in our lunch breaks. They're going, are you crazy? Take a lunch break on a day when it's that time? I said, yeah, you don't eat, you don't break, you don't get out and walk a little bit. Your brain is going to be mush, and the things you put out are not going to be usable. So as much as they were arguing with me saying, we're not going to take a lunch break, I said, you guys can work through, I'm taking a lunch break. So here's what I'm suggesting. And by the way, the more we argue about it, the less time we have per module. So up to you. We got right into it. And sure enough, by the end of the day, about a half hour before the end of the day, we had rough scripts, very rough, mind you, but we had the rough scripts. Same project, toward the end of it, somebody wanted a presentation about how we were going along, what progress we were making. I kept asking, do they want a PowerPoint deck, or can we just do this orally in an informal setting? And the word kept coming back, no deck, just be ready to present informally. 45 minutes before the presentation, we got the call that anybody with a brain would have anticipated. And it was, oh, we do want a deck after all. And my manager called and said, can you put a deck together in about 35 minutes for this? I said, get the hell off the phone, give me 30 minutes, then call me back, tell me where you are, and what I've done at that point will be your deck. Fastest I've ever worked on a deck, but I knew I had about 30 to 35 minutes. Went to resources I knew where I could get images, put it together, and we went in and they had a deck that to their eyes could have taken weeks to do, but for us it was a 30-minute deck. And I thought, okay, that's like speed PowerPointing, and it's a good skill to have. Don't let your bosses, your supervisors, your clients, your learners throw you by putting barriers on that you feel you can't meet in these circumstances where you can control it a bit. Tell them what you can accomplish in that period of time, accomplish it. And if they need more time, you explain to them, I need more time. I'm getting another comment here, I think it's from Denise. In my mind and view, I would do develop before I design. Yeah, let us not get tied up in the semantics of any of these models. These are, to my eyes, nice models that are structural things that we throw out the window the minute we don't need them. So if for you, the terminology should be develop before you design, fine. What you want to do is have a process that works for you and ultimately gives you the kind of training that works for you and for your learners. Implementation, it's that day of just being with people, getting them engaged, doing what you can. And you're seeing that. So we're not going to spend a lot of time today on implementation. Implementation for us is each of these sessions we do together where you see what I do to help you and interact with you, and what you'll do in sessions 5 and 6. And finally, evaluation. There's this thing where we get what are called smile sheets, and it seems to be based on, did you make your learners smile? How happy were they at the end of the session? And I love this one because it's either love or hate, 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 hate. And don't you wish it were that easy? What we're going to see a little in a few minutes is evaluation models that tell us that's the starting point, not the ending point. And in many ways, it's the least significant of it, because all it talks about is perceptions about how the session went. It doesn't say word one about the impact, the transformation on the learners. So for me, I understand, and we'll see this model of 4 different levels of evaluation. This first level is kind of nice to have, so as you know, everybody didn't walk away really unhappy with you. But what we really want to focus is, what did they learn? How are they going to use it? And what impact does it have down the road? And here we are. 3 things that I think are wonderful resources. Again, you'll have the slide deck, so you don't need to be jotting down titles now unless you want them. But the first one is that whole book on training library people in the ADDIE model. The second book here is Rhea Joyce Rubin's book on demonstrating results. It is not a training book. It is a book about programming and measuring results of programs. And yet it's one of the best things I've ever read in terms of being able to adapt it back to training. It's a wonderfully complex book that goes through all kinds of things for you about how you can evaluate the results of a program. But for me, the underlying theme, and Rhea hated when I reduced it to this. We actually got in an argument a little bit about my saying, I love the book because it keeps making us ask, so what, so what, so what? Because that's such a simplification. I said, but it's the heart of it. What she talks about over and over again is do not evaluate by saying, all right, so we had a summer reading program. Was success based on the fact that we had 10,000 kids read? That's where a lot of us typically are. Rio pushes us to go further and says, so what? 10,000 kids read. What was the impact? Well, they got introduced to literature. So what? Well, it made them want to read more books. So what? It enriched their lives. How did it enrich their lives? They are now better readers who better communicate with their friends. They are better students in school. And by being better students, they're setting themselves up for lifelong success, being able to work effectively in the workplace and at a civic level. That's bingo. By asking so what and pushing the envelope and getting to that final thing, that's where the results are. So Ria's book is really wonderfully outlined in terms of how you look at a program, but we can adapt that into our own setting and not be happy with an evaluation that says, I trained 850 people on how to use the library information system. The real high level impact for me would be you train those people, they are able to comfortably and effectively use that system. And by using it with library learners are getting greater access to the collections, which means they are doing better at finding jobs, they're doing better at dealing with medical issues that they have. Some of this is hard to document, and yet that's what we need to be focusing on. What's the ultimate impact of the training? We could do that right now and say, what's the ultimate impact of this? If I say we train 15 or 30 people on how to train other trainers, so what? That's level one. But if all of you, as a result of this, go back into your workplace, use what we've talked about here, maybe even using these same slide decks with your employees, with your colleagues, and sharing some of this with them, they become better trainers. And when they're training their colleagues and training the public on how to do things, it's having an impact on the public's ability and the colleagues' ability to make meaningful transformations in their lives. That's what we want. And now we're at Kirkpatrick, one of the other videos that I had mentioned to you. And I'm jumping ahead because I thought I had one more slide, but let me just say the evaluating training programs. When Kirkpatrick wrote this, it started as 4 articles back in the 50s for what was then the American Society of Training and Development. He was asked to talk about evaluating the effects of training, and he created a 4-level system that we still use these days. People have done modifications of it, and there are other people, of course, doing evaluation techniques that are much different than this. But I love it because it's basic and it repeats what I just said. Their level 1 is, were the learners happy? Okay, you want to know that, but that's not our focus. Level 2 is, what can you show that they learned? You can do that through a quiz. You can do it with the kind of things that we do in these sessions where I ask you, what do you remember from the last session? What will you be doing to prepare for the next session? What are you going to do to prepare for your presentation? And ultimately, how will you use what you got from Train the Trainers in your library day to day, next week, next month, next year, and next decade? So that starts to look at level 2. What did you learn? Level 3 is, how are you going to apply it? Again, you can do that if you go back to the 6 disciplines method. The format there is fantastic. You've heard me say that up front, there is the evaluation with the assessment with the manager and the learner. They decide what's going to be learned. Then there's a day of delivery where the actual learning event happens, and you hope that some of the transformation results. And then there's that all important phase of what do they do when they get back to the work phase. With the 6 disciplines model, they will go back to the learners and the managers anywhere from a month-long period to 3 or 4 months. Every Friday toward the end of the day, they do what they call Fridays 5. Toward the end of the day, an email goes out from the company to the learners and the managers. 2 questions are asked, meant to be dealt with in 5 minutes or less. First question is, what did you do this week with your learning? Second question is, what will you do next week with your learning? That's what changed it from 85% learning scrap, 85% people abandoning things within 6 months of having learned it, to 6 months later, 85% of the learners actually using it in the workplace. It's as simple as just saying in the workplace, we value this. And the learner knows that the manager is seeing it. It's not a punitive thing, but the manager and the learner are partners in that. They are co-conspirators in that learning process, working toward the ultimate change that you want to see. You want to see transformation happen? Make it impossible for a learner to go back to the previous method after the training. That you can do in a case like what I described in that hospice situation, where all the learners had to learn how to go off paper and off laptops into mobile devices, including tablets, to do their medical record keeping. Once the training was over and we went through a transition period where they got extra support, there were no more laptops, there was no more paper. You were working on those devices. So if you have the luxury of that, like you were talking about training people on a library information system, that makes that level 4 thing really kind of an easy thing to look for. But if it's something like, we want you to stop harassing people, we want you to give better customer service, we want you to use this tool instead of that tool. If you leave the initial tool in the workplace, it's going to undercut that 85% success rate because people don't have the impetus to go there. So evaluating training programs. First is, were they happy? Second, what did they learn? Third, how are they applying it? And four, what's the ultimate significance of what they did? Time for some conversation here. I need to move the things that are on my screen so I can even see the question here. A concrete step you can take when you return to your library to identify a learning need that you want to meet through an on-site or online opportunity, whether it's a class, a workshop, webinar, or other format. Anybody want to unmute or put into chat, what's one concrete step you can take that draws off of ADDIE and draws off of these 4 levels that will make a difference in your training?
At the risk of sounding like I'm oversimplifying everything, ask, be like, is this something that would benefit people? Managers, is this something that you think that your employees would need? Ask.
Absolutely. We'll have some slides that you've just made it very easy for me to blast through a little bit later in this segment of it where we talk about ways to determine that. But yeah, it all does come down to asking. Thank you, Rachel. Anybody else? I see one of our people, Inga's having to go. Great to have had you here today. If you're still here, maybe you've already left. But anyway, great to have people. And it shows us the thing I keep talking about. If somebody has to leave, you respect that among your learners, you understand that, and you understand that we're adults, we will learn what we need to learn, and we'll take responsibility for catching up on that. It's just what we need to bring to our learning spaces. But same this question, at least one other person. I see Denise has put a comment in, to fully understand why the learning needs to happen in the first place. Absolutely. If we haven't asked ourselves why we're doing it, we're missing a golden opportunity to either save ourselves a lot of unnecessary work or to further develop something that really meets that. And also how to measure long-term impact. Great. Let's move to, I think there's one more question here that we're going to have. No, it's actually getting into this. And this anticipated what Rachel was asking. How do you assess? Well, there's a variety of ways. You can assess by setting up some meetings with staff, and you can use tools like Doodle to get past that painful process sometimes of bringing people together. There are other ways that you can set up meetings and get to your assessment things. There's an article that will be referenced in the resources part of this. Just found this yesterday as I was looking for updates. Top free online appointment scheduling software for 2021. This was published about 2 months ago, so it updated the older article I've been using in previous versions of this. Setting up schedules, setting up meetings with people, keeping those meetings concise and interesting and focused on the topic is important. Again, full disclosure, in preparing for this series, as I do with any client that wants me to do a train-the-trainer series, I have some upfront meetings with the client, either face-to-face or online. I generally go for a minimum of 3 of those as the development phase is underway. And if possible, I want those meetings to include some of the actual learners so they can have a voice into the process. In this case, I think all of you were so immersed in the other part of the process that we didn't want to pull you out of that. So we got some learners who went through the program a year or 2 ago, and we set up 3 Friday afternoons, solid 1 hour, where we explored 3 different aspects of this to make sure that I understood what their learning needs and what they thought you would all benefit from. So again, modeled what I'm talking about here today. I share that with you so that you understand what can go into that, and stress to you, it does not have to be difficult. It's actually fun and engaging. What I did was we used Zoom, and I had a document up on the side, a Word document. So as people were talking, responding to the prep questions I had, I was typing their notes out, and that gave me the roadmap for the session. It's a really nice, easy process to follow. Exploring other options. We all kind of sit in our offices and we may listen to the same 5 or 10 people if we're in a large organization. If we're in a small organization, it's not large enough for us to have more than the same 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 people that we may be working with. But exploring in terms of learning needs and options available to us also includes getting outside of our own little bubble. The more you can create a community of learning, like what we have here, as long as we're together, or joining things like the California Library Association, being around other librarians who train, being active in the American Library Association, so you're around some of the best trainers we have in our industry, or doing what I've done, which is the extra step of joining the Association for Talent Development. The rates are not cheap there, but they're worth every penny that you or your organization puts out, because you have local chapters where you can interact with trainers outside of libraries and get ideas that are transferable back to libraries. You can interact, as I do, at the national and international level, where you're seeing the best colleagues ever, and they're just available to you through the association. So open your horizons to the best of your ability. You stretch your resources as much as you can without saying, well, I just really can't afford that. It's a choice of this membership or my food on my table tonight. We're not talking about that level, but explore options that may not be obvious to you and look for the kind of things that are out there that benefit you and the learners you work with, because you're hearing voices that you don't normally hear and bringing it back into your own place. So now we're really going to have the rubber hit the road. And this is where I'm going to start doing some brief pauses in the recording so that people aren't just watching us as we kind of brainstorm this. We're going to start getting you ready for your presentations I'm going to ask you to identify 2 training topics. I want you to be thinking about this for a minute, write it down, and then we're going to continue for you developing this. You can develop it in a Word document if you want. You can put it on a piece of paper, but make it work for you. I have an instructional design friend that I think is brilliant. When he's at this phase, he actually has a big door in what used to be his apartment. Now he's moved it into a studio, but in his apartment, when he was at the beginning of his instructional design phase, when he was doing stuff like this, he would put his ideas on Post-its, put them on a door just randomly. And as he worked into the design phase and the development phase, I'm sorry, I got those wrong, development and then design, he would move the Post-its around and add more so that he was creating things in a flexible fashion like that. So find a playful method that works for you. And there's a second part to the instructions here, which I just blasted past because I'm inept today. That is, when you focus on one of the 2 topics, oh, and I got the chat up. I'm just having lots of fun here. Sorry, guys. The second part of that is, after you choose those 2 topics, I want you to have a backup here in case your first one doesn't work out. You're going to do 3 things, which are right up on the screen. Identify key stakeholders to contact, identify ways you'll contact them, and outline steps that you will take to keep them involved. I'm going to guess that in 5 minutes or less, we can complete this process. So for those of you live, I'm going to stop the recording. We can see each other and you'll be able to unmute and ask me questions if you have any. For those that are watching the recording, there's going to be a brief pause where I wait and then stop the recording, start the recording again, brief pause for editing purposes, and we'll dive back in. If you are watching the archived version, please pause the recording now and do that same 5-minute exercise that the learners are doing live in the session. If you're watching the archive version of this, welcome back. We just had kind of a spirited discussion around 3 proposals that the participants in today's session are coming up with. The process we followed was pretty straightforward. They described what they were trying to do, what they were thinking about doing. We did some quick brainstorming saying, yeah, that works. Here's a suggestion for it. In one case, we were looking at a possible training that was overly specific in terms of what it was addressing. So we stepped back 1 step to say, what's the larger issue? And that became the topic that that particular presenter is going to present. What we also decided among the 3 people that are here is which of the sessions they will actually do the presentations in. So one person is going to do session 5, 2 people are going to do session 6, and we're hoping that other participants in this program will also pull that in. Final big thing we want to hit today is defining and setting the goals and objectives. I find that because, as Denise pointed out earlier, the whole thing of, well, do I design or do I develop first? I mean, it's jargon. You just do what makes sense to you. In the same way, goals and objectives can be jargon terms, and different people in different settings have different definitions. So I want to be explicit here, for purposes of this course, what I mean when I talk about a goal and what I mean when I talk about an objective. For us, the goals are the lofty, broad picture view. Going back to the example I had earlier of a new library information system is coming in and everybody has to use it. The goal there is every staff member needs to be able to comfortably use the new library information system by the time they finish the trainings. The objectives, and I'm hitting the wrong button here, so there we go. The objectives become the specific measurable results-oriented thing that we use there. So if our goal was everybody has to use the system, an objective is a librarian will be able to look up 3 different materials, a book, a video, CD-ROM, whatever it is that they're going to look up. They will be able to do that. They will also be able to help a library user reserve a book. They will be able to help somebody check out a book. And so by doing that, you're saying they will show me that they can check out a book. They will show me that they can locate a book. Those are the measurable things that make the rubber hit the road in our situation. It's not complex, but again, it's 2 parts of the same process. The first thing you want to do is establish your goals. I'm going to suggest for purposes of our course where you're going to do a 5-minute or less presentation, you only want to have 1 goal. And for 5 minutes or less, you probably only want to have 2 objectives because you're not going to have much time to do any other things. So for purposes of the course, when you're doing your assignment for sessions 5 and 6, 1 goal, 2 objectives. If you're doing a workshop, what I generally try to do in a workshop for each session is I will have up to 3 goals, and I'll have a couple of objectives for each of those things. So it fits into that whole chunking philosophy we've been talking about. They're not going to absorb more than 3 big things anyway, so 3 goals. And the subsidiary things are not going to remember more than about 3, 4, maybe 5 of those. So it doesn't make sense to have more than a couple of objectives. With that in mind, let us again look at an exercise that will take us 1 step further to this. And we'll do this again fairly quickly. I'll stop the recording long enough for us in this group to be able to brainstorm stuff. If you're watching the recording, pause the recording as soon as I tell you to pause it. Establish a goal and 2 objectives, and then we'll come back and we'll do a wrap for today's session. So give me a second. I will stop the recording. All right, we're off the clock. Anybody want to throw out an objective or 2 or just jot some stuff down?
I think we're still recording. Mine still
We
has the
are. It
flash.
says, do I want to stop the recording? I wanted to pause it. So no, let me cancel that. Thanks for catching that. All right, welcome back for the final few minutes of our session. Again, we had some behind the scenes discussion about how to define the goals, how to get the objectives out there. Each of the objectives that the learners have come up with for our sessions describe something that is actionable in terms of what the learner will do. And that's what you want to do. You don't want to focus on, were they happy with me? Will they come back to our place because they were happy? It's, did they get what they wanted? Is there that moment of transformation that out of the learning comes something positive? So that's where we're going to leave it for today. And when we come back together, we're going to focus a little bit more on this whole design development process and move into day of delivery. But what I want to end this with is a quick summary, because of course we all know as learners that having a summary of key points helps us to solidify our learning. As you probably gathered from looking at the slide decks that I put out on these sessions, I'm not big on bullet points. I don't think they're an effective way to go. But I did learn a trick from a colleague well over a decade ago that if we do a summary by pulling the strongest images out of our deck, we're helping our learner in 2 ways. 1, we're repeating the point, but 2, we're creating an anchor to an image we saw that helps us to solidify it. So this is kind of a learning anchor thing. In today's session, we talked about some of the characteristics of great trainers, the ones that we want to emulate as a result of seeing them. We have this image of the concert pianist reminding us that performance and practice, actually the practice part of it, is really important. The second thing we got, and I have to move some stuff around on my screen that you're not seeing just so I'm not blocking my own image. Give me a second to do that. Second thing and third thing, actually, we talked about a process which was the disciplines of breakthrough learning, and that whole idea that it is a process, each step of the way leading to the next step, and it goes on after the formal sessions end. And we looked at ADDIE as a framework, using the Wegner book as one possible model to look at ADDIE as a thing that will help us out. And again, just to pause here so I can get us to the 4th thing. We talked about goals and objectives, and this picture was meant to remind you that the the goals are those lofty, big picture views that are dynamic and panoramic. And when we get to our objectives, those are the specific measurable things that get us there. And the final image, unfortunately, we didn't go far enough in the slide deck. Oh, we did. I did change this. And this is a two-pronged thing. Again, we started with the idea that you don't want an empty room because you didn't assess properly. And the second part of this was all about creating something so beautiful, so transformative, taking that larva and getting it out into the butterfly, that's what we want to have in the forefront of our minds. Again, taking you under the hood, I've talked about the idea of being flexible, improvisational at points. I've admitted to you in both sessions that I'm never done with a slide deck until after the presentation is done. I actually go back and revise things so that the learners have them. This final image of the butterfly came about a half hour this morning before the session. It was not that I was working on the deck. I had polished it off as much as I was going to last night before I went to bed so I'd get a good night's sleep. But as I was reviewing it in anticipation of today's session, I thought, wait a minute, you've totally missed the point you try to make to people to highlight the important stuff. And I did not have a slide that talked about the importance of learning as a transformational moment. That's when I thought, okay, what image can I grab quickly? A butterfly. Let's get the most dramatic butterfly we can. Let's get it into that deck. I'm hoping that during the session today, you didn't look at that slide when it first came up and say, oh, wow, he added that at the last minute. I could tell it doesn't fit anything else. The point was to make it so integral to it, it added to rather than detracted from. And the way I managed to pull it off, a resource for any of you looking for strong images, there are many places out there where you can get free things. A tool that I got introduced to recently is called Pixabay.com, Pixab, I think, ay.com. And that's where I found that butterfly in 5 seconds or less by going into Pixabay, typing in butterfly, choosing the most dramatic one I could find, cutting and pasting it into the deck, creating another slide and saying, okay, I'm good to go. Denise has made a great point in the chat. Goals are the forest, objectives are the individual trees. Nice. We need to do another slide, Denise, for the next one to have the forest and the tree slides. And she's talking about the photo. Exactly. The comment of it's a beautiful photo, it's gorgeous, that should make it memorable. And as you're thinking back, reflecting on today's lesson and thinking about what you got out of it, if you're struggling to draw back lessons, think back, what images do I remember from the slide? And probably you're going to remember that empty classroom and the butterfly and a few of the others. And that becomes the anchor. I'm doing that for you and with you as co-conspirators in learning so that you will do that with your learners. And I think with that, let's get to the slide of next steps, which is what to do between now and the next session. To prepare for number 3, make a final decision on your topic. For those of you watching this, if you're going to be watching the whole series archived in chronological order, take time between watching this and watching the next one to do that exercise. Describe the learning need you're trying to meet, establish a goal, 2 concrete measurable objectives. That should take you to a successful point. There's our recesses from today, our resources, not our recess. We've had enough of that. I think we're past the hour. So any last minute questions from anybody in the session, or are we good to go? With that, thank you, everybody. Lovely working with you. I'll pause the recording now, which will end the session for everybody else, and I'll stay on for private chat with anybody that has a couple more minutes that they want to do.